Hello there everyone, welcome to Shadowman Stories. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Marcus Whitehorse, and I need to tell you something that happened to me in 1967. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I was a park ranger back then, had been for 12 years. Olympic National Forest in Washington was my home, my life. I knew every trail, every creek, every damn tree in those 15,000 acres of Quinault Valley. People said I could walk those woods blindfolded, and they weren't wrong. I was 34 years old and felt like I was falling apart, just got divorced. Sarah took the kids, Emma and Katie, my two little girls. I only saw them on weekends. Now, the house felt empty. The forest felt like the only place that made sense anymore. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was little. She was Quinault, born and raised on the reservation. She'd talk about spirits in the trees, guardians, that protected the sacred places. I thought it was just old stories, you know. Primitive stuff from before people understood science. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was October when it started. The leaves were turning, and there was this cold bite in the air that meant winter was coming fast. I was sitting in my ranger station, drinking my 5th cup of coffee and smoking Lucky Strikes, when Pete Kowalski showed up. Pete was the foreman for Cascade Timber Company. Big guy, hands like tree stumps, always wore the same dirty baseball cap. He was sweating, even though it was cold outside. "Marcus, we got a problem," he said, not bothering to sit down. 3 of my boys didn't come back yesterday. I stubbed out my cigarette. "Which boys?" "Jim Hartley, Dave Morrison, and that new kid, Tommy Watts his name. They were working the north section, near that grove of big trees." I knew the place. He meant the old growth grove, where the trees were so tall you couldn't see the tops. The Quinault people called it sacred. The logging company called it valuable. "When did you last see them?" "Yesterday morning. They were supposed to mark trees for cutting. Had their lunch pails, their gear, everything. Never came back to the truck." I grabbed my jacket and equipment, standard search and rescue kit, rope, first aid, compass, my radio. Pete followed me outside where the company truck was waiting. "We need to find them fast," Pete said. "Weather service says there's a storm coming. Big one. If we don't get them out before it hits, ... He didn't need to finish. I'd seen what October storms could do in these mountains. People caught in them didn't come out. We drove to the grove in silence. The trees got bigger as we went deeper into the forest. When we finally stopped, I could see why the Quinault people thought this place was special. The trees here were ancient. Some of them had been growing since before Columbus. They reached up so high they seemed to touch the clouds. Pete pointed to a pile of equipment by the tree line. "That's their stuff. Lunch pails, axes, everything." I walked over and knelt down. The lunch pails were arranged in a perfect triangle. The food inside was untouched, no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. It was like the men had just vanished. "This is weird," I said. "Weird how? Look at how neat everything is. If something happened, an accident, an animal attack, whatever, there'd be signs. Dropped tools, scattered food, something." Pete lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "So what do you think happened?" I stood up and looked at the tree line. There was something wrong about it, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The trees seemed too quiet, too still. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Don't go in there, Marcus." I turned around. Joseph Clearwater was standing by the truck. He was maybe 70 years old, with long gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He was my grandmother's cousin, one of the tribal elders. "Joseph, what are you doing here? I came to warn you. Stay away from the tall trees. They're protected." Pete laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Protected by what?" "The tree police." Joseph didn't smile. "By something older than your saws and trucks. Something that doesn't like strangers in sacred places." I felt embarrassed. Here I was, a professional ranger, and this old man was talking about spirits and sacred places like it was real. "Joseph, 3 men are missing. I have to look for them. No good will come of it." "Come on," I said. "This is 1967. We don't believe in forest spirits anymore." Joseph looked at me with those deep eyes. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. That stung. But I had a job to do. I adjusted my equipment and headed toward the trees. I'll radio back in 2 hours, I told Pete. If you don't hear from me, send help. As I walked toward the grove, I heard Joseph's voice one more time. The Guardian is awake, Marcus, and it's angry. The first thing I noticed was the silence. I've spent my whole life in these forests. I know the sounds, birds calling, squirrels chattering, wind through the leaves, insects buzzing. There's always some kind of noise. But inside the grove, there was nothing, just my boots crunching on dead leaves and my own breathing. I pulled out my compass to check direction. The needle was spinning like a top, round and round, never stopping. I tapped it, shook it, but it kept spinning. What the hell? I looked at my watch. The hands had stopped at 3:17. I wound it up, but the hands wouldn't move. My radio crackled with static. Marcus, you there? Pete's voice sounded far away. Yeah, I'm here. Having some equipment problems. What kind of problems? Compass won't work. Watch stopped. Must be some kind of magnetic field. Just find my boys and get out of there. I kept walking deeper into the grove. The trees here were massive. Some of them were so big around that 6 men holding hands couldn't circle them. They reached up into the fog like giant pillars holding up the sky. That's when I found the first real clue. 20 feet up, a Douglas fir, caught on a branch, was a yellow hard hat. Jim Hartley's name was written on it in black marker, but that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was the marks on the tree trunk. 4 parallel gouges, each one about 3 inches deep and 8 inches long. They went from the base of the tree up to where the hard hat was caught. I'd seen bear claws before. These weren't bear claws. They were too big, too deep, and bears don't climb straight up trees like that. I pulled out my camera and took pictures. Whatever made those marks had to be huge. I kept following the trail deeper into the grove. Every few minutes I'd find something else. A work glove here, a thermos there, but no sign of the men themselves. The trees seemed to be getting taller the deeper I went, and closer together. Sometimes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there, just trees. I was starting to feel watched. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? It was like that, but multiplied by 100. Every shadow could be hiding something. Every rustling leaf could mean danger. My radio crackled again. Marcus, it's getting dark. You need to head back. I looked up. Pete was right. The sun was setting, and in the thick forest, it would be pitch black soon. I'm going to make camp, I said. I'll search more in the morning. The hell you will. Come back now. I can't leave those men out here overnight. The radio went silent. Then Pete's voice came back, but it was different, scared. Marcus, you need to get out of there now. Why? What's wrong? We can see you on the thermal scope. You're not alone. My blood went cold. What do you mean? There's something big moving around you. Something really big. I spun around, looking in all directions. I couldn't see anything in the growing darkness. We're 30 feet to your right, moving toward you. I turned right and saw it. A shadow between the trees. Not a normal shadow. This one was moving against the light, flowing like water but solid as stone. It was tall, taller than any man, and it was watching me. I fumbled for my flashlight, but my hands were shaking so bad, I dropped it. It rolled away into the leaves. Marcus, get out of there. I started running. Behind me, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A sound like trees groaning in a windstorm, but there was no wind. And underneath that, something else. Something that might have been breathing. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes. Behind me, the groaning sound got louder and closer. I burst out of the grove and fell to my knees by the truck. Pete and 2 other men were there, with rifles and flashlights. You see it? Pete asked. I looked back at the tree line. Nothing, just darkness. I saw something, I said, but I don't know what. We're leaving, Pete said. Now. As we drove away, I looked back one more time. For just a second, I thought I saw 2 eyes looking back at me from the darkness. They were yellow, like amber, and they were full of hate. We made it back to town just as the first raindrops started falling. Pete dropped me off at my cabin and drove away without saying goodbye. I sat in my kitchen drinking whiskey and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Outside, the storm was getting worse. Lightning flashed and thunder rolled across the mountains. Around midnight, My radio crackled to life. "Marcos, you there?" It was Tom Patterson, another ranger. He was supposed to be on night patrol. "Yeah, I'm here. What's up?" "I'm at the Grove. Something's wrong." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "I found one of the missing loggers, Jim Hartley." "Is he alive?" There was a long pause. When Tom spoke again, his voice was different. "Scared you need to get out here. Now." "Tom, is he alive? Just come, please." The radio went. Dead. I grabbed my gear and headed back into the storm. The drive back to the Grove was a nightmare. The storm had turned the dirt road into a river of mud. Lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, and the thunder was so loud it hurt my ears. I found Tom's truck at the edge of the Grove. The door was open, engine still running. Tom was nowhere to be seen. "Tom," I called out. "Where are you?" No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but it didn't reach very far. The Grove seemed even bigger at night, like it went on forever. I found Tom about 50 yards and he was standing perfectly still, staring up at something in the trees. "Tom, what are you doing out here?" He didn't answer, didn't even move. I walked closer. "Tom," that's when I saw what he was looking at. 25 feet up, impaled on a broken branch, was Jim Hartley. His body was twisted at impossible angles, and his eyes were gone. Just empty sockets staring down at us. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the branch wasn't thick enough to support a man's weight. It should have broken off. But somehow, it was holding him up there like he weighed nothing. Tom finally spoke, but his voice was barely a whisper. "How did he get up there?" "I don't know. There's no ladder, no climbing gear, no way to reach that high." I shined my flashlight around the base of the tree. Tom was right. No equipment, no footprints, no sign of how Jim had gotten up there. "We need to get him down," I said. "How?" Before I could answer, we heard it. That same groaning sound from earlier, but louder, much louder. It seemed to come from all around us, like the trees themselves were screaming. Tom grabbed my arm. "What is that?" The sound got closer, and with it came a smell, like wet earth and rotting leaves and something else, something wild and ancient. "We need to leave," I said. Now, we started running, but the forest had changed. The paths I'd known for 12 years were gone. Trees that had been to my left were now to my right. The Grove seemed to be shifting around us, like we were trapped in a maze. "This way," Tom said, pointing to what looked like a path. We ran toward it, but the path curved back on itself. We ended up exactly where we started, under Jim Hartley's body. "That's impossible," Tom said. The groaning sound was getting louder, and now I could hear footsteps, heavy ones, coming from all directions. "Up there," I said, pointing to a thick branch about 10 feet up. "We can climb." Tom boosted me up, and I helped pull him after me. From our perch, we could see more of the Grove. What we saw made no sense. The trees were moving, not swaying in the wind. There was no wind. They were actually moving, sliding across the ground like they were on wheels. The whole Grove was rearranging itself around us. "This isn't real," Tom said. "This can't be real." That's when we saw it. A shadow moved between the trees below us. At first I thought it was just darkness, but then I realized it was solid. It was tall, maybe 12 feet, and it moved like it was floating. It stopped directly under our tree and looked up. I'll never forget those eyes. They were yellow, like I'd seen before, but up close they were different. They were intelligent, ancient, and they were full of rage. The thing reached up with one massive arm. Its hand was bigger than a dinner plate, with fingers that ended in claws. It grabbed our tree and shook it. The whole tree, a Douglas fir that had been growing for 300 years, shook like a sapling in a hurricane. Tom lost his grip and fell. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. The thing turned its attention to him. It reached down and picked him up like he was a child. Tom started screaming. "Please, I didn't do anything wrong." The thing tilted its head, like it was listening. Then it spoke, not with its mouth, but directly into my mind. Asterisk, "You came to the sacred place. You brought the tree killers." Asterisk, the voice was old beyond measure. It made my brain hurt just to hear it. Tom was still screaming. I'm sorry. Sorry is not enough." The thing carried Tom to the nearest tree, a massive cedar, and pushed him against the trunk. The bark began to grow over him, like it was alive. Tom's screams got muffled as the bark covered his mouth. Then his eyes, in 30 seconds he was gone. just a man-shaped bulge in the tree trunk. The thing looked up at me. Asterisk, you will leave. You will never return. You will tell the tree killers to stay away. Asterisk, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was paralyzed with fear. Asterisk, do you understand? I managed to nod. Good. The thing walked away, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. As soon as it was gone, the grove returned to normal. The trees stopped moving. The paths reappeared. I climbed down from the tree and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the truck. Tom's body was in the cedar tree, but Jim Hartley was gone. The branch where he'd been impaled was clean, like nothing had ever happened. I drove back to town as fast as I could, but I knew I'd have to come back. Dave Morrison and Tommy was still missing, and the thing, the Guardian, was still out there, protecting its sacred grove. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tom disappearing into the tree bark. I saw those yellow eyes full of ancient rage. By morning, I'd made my decision. I was going back. I knew it was stupid. I knew I'd probably die. But I couldn't leave Dave and Tommy out there, and I couldn't let that thing think it had one. I loaded my truck with everything I could think of: rope, axes, flares, even a shotgun. I knew the gun probably wouldn't help, but it made me feel better. Pete met me at the grove entrance. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were shaking. Did you find them? He asked. I found Jim. He's dead. What about Tom? I couldn't tell him the truth. Tom's dead too. Pete stared at me. What killed them? I don't know. That was a lie. I knew exactly what killed them. But Pete wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. We need to call the police, Pete said. No, not yet. I'm going back in to find the other two. Are you crazy? After what happened? I'm a ranger. It's my job. Pete grabbed my arm. Marcus, whatever's in there, it's not natural. We should seal off the whole area. I can't do that without proof. What more proof do you need? 2 men are dead. I pulled away from him. I'm going in. If I'm not back in 2 hours, call the police. I walked toward the grove. Behind me, Pete was yelling, but I didn't turn around. The trees looked different. In daylight, smaller somehow, more normal, but I knew that was just an illusion. The Guardian was still in there, waiting. I found Dave Morrison about a quarter mile into the grove. He was sitting with his back against a tree, looking like he was taking a rest. But when I got closer, I saw the truth. He was dead. Had been for a while, but there wasn't a mark on him. No wounds, no blood, nothing. He just looked like he'd sat down and died. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and in them I saw something that made my blood freeze. Terror. Pure, absolute terror. Whatever had killed him, he'd seen it coming, and it had scared him to death. I was taking pictures when I heard the voice. Marcus. I spun around. Tommy, the young logger, was standing about 20 feet away. He looked normal except for his eyes. They were yellow now, like the Guardian's. Tommy, are you okay? He smiled, but it wasn't his smile. I'm fine, better than fine. Where have you been? We've been looking for you. I've been learning. The Guardian has been teaching me. My hand moved to the shotgun on my back. Teaching you what? About the sacred places, about respect, about what happens to those who defile the ancient groves. Tommy, you need to come with me. We need to get you to a doctor. He laughed, but it sounded wrong, like it was coming from somewhere else. I'm not Tommy anymore. I'm part of something bigger now, something older. The trees around us began to move again, not sliding like before, but growing, getting taller and wider. The canopy above us thickened until almost no light could get through. You came back, Tommy said. The Guardian said you would. Where is it? Everywhere, in every tree, every root, every leaf. This whole grove is alive. Marcus, it's been alive for thousands of years. I pulled out the shotgun. I want to talk to it. Tommy's yellow eyes flashed. You are. The voice, in my head, was stronger now, more clear. Asterisk, he returned to the sacred place. Why? Asterisk, 2 men are still missing. I came to find them. You found them. I found bodies. I want the living men back. Asterisk, they chose their fate. They came with saws and axes. They would have destroyed the ancient ones. Asterisk, they were just doing their job. Asterisk, their job was destruction. My job is protection. Asterisk, I felt something behind me and turned. The Guardian was there, not 20 feet away. In daylight, it was even more terrifying. It was covered in bark and moss, like it was part of the forest itself. Its eyes were like burning coals. You're a Sasquatch, I said. Asterisk, I am older than your words for me. I am the guardian of the sacred grove. I have protected this place since before your people came to these lands. Asterisk, you're murdering innocent men. Asterisk, they are not innocent. They came to murder the ancient ones. Trees that have stood for 1,000 years. Trees that are sacred to my people. Asterisk, your people. Asterisk, the Quinault. The ones who understand. The ones who know to stay away from the sacred places. Asterisk, I thought about my grandmother's stories, about Joseph's warning. You're what she was talking about, the spirits in the forest. Asterisk, I am the last of my kind, the last guardian, and I will not let the sacred grove be destroyed. Asterisk, the guardian took a step toward me. The ground shook under its weight. Asterisk, you will leave. You will never return. You will tell the tree killers to stay away forever. Asterisk, and if I don't, then you will join your friends. I raised the shotgun. I can't do that. Then you will die. The guardian rushed at me. I fired both barrels, but the shots just passed through it like it was made of mist. It grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off the ground. Its grip was like iron. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world started to go black, but then I remembered something. Something Joseph had said. Some places demand respect. I stopped struggling. I let the shotgun fall from my hands. I'm sorry, I whispered. The guardian's grip loosened slightly. I'm sorry, I said again, louder. I didn't understand. I didn't listen. The guardian set me down but didn't let go. Asterisk, you understand now? Yes, this is a sacred place. I should have listened to the elders. Asterisk, and the tree killers. I'll make sure they stay away. The guardian stared at me for a long moment, then it released me. Asterisk, you will keep this promise. I swear it. Asterisk, good, because if you break it, I will find you. No matter where you go, no matter how far you run, I will find you. Asterisk, the guardian stepped back. The trees began to return to normal. The light came back. Go now. And remember, some places are not meant for your kind. I picked up my shotgun and walked away. I didn't look back. When I got back to the truck, Pete was waiting with 2 police officers. Where are they? Pete asked. I looked at the 3 men. How could I explain what I'd seen? How could I tell them about the guardian, about the sacred grove, about Tommy's yellow eyes? They're dead, I said. All of them. How? I don't know. Maybe they got lost in the storm. Maybe they fell. The bodies are too deep in the forest to recover. It was a lie, but it was the only lie that would work. The police asked questions. I answered them as best I could, without mentioning the guardian. Within a week, the whole thing was ruled an industrial accident. The families got compensation. The grove was quietly removed from the logging company's permits. Nobody ever asked why, but I knew. The guardian had reached out somehow, touched the right people, influenced the right decisions. The sacred grove was safe. Pete never spoke to me again. I don't blame him. He knew I wasn't telling the truth, but he also knew there was something in those woods that he didn't want to face. I stayed on as a ranger for 5 more years. I made sure hikers stayed away from the grove. I made sure no other logging companies got permits for that area. I learned to speak some Quinault and became friends with Joseph Clearwater. He never said, "I told you so." But sometimes, when we were sitting by his fire, he'd look at me and nod, like he knew what I'd seen, like he was proud that I'd finally understood. I left the Forest Service in 1972, moved to Seattle, got a job with the City Parks Department, married a nice woman named Linda. We had a good life, but I never forgot the guardian, and I never went back to the grove. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up from dreams about yellow eyes and trees that moved like living things. I'd go to the window and look out at the city lights, and I'd wonder if the guardian was still out there, still protecting the sacred places. I hope it is, because there are things in this world that are older than us, things that were here before, our cities and our roads and our chainsaws, things that remember what the world was like when the forests covered everything, and some of those things are still fighting back. The grove is still there. I looked it up online last year. It's part of a nature preserve now, protected by law. Hikers can visit, but they have to stay on marked trails. No camping allowed, no fires, no loud noises. The signs say it's to protect the wildlife, but I know the truth. The signs are to protect the visitors, because the guardian is still there, still watching, still protecting the sacred grove. And if you go there, if you step off the trail, if you show disrespect to the ancient trees, well, Just remember what Joseph told me all those years ago. Some places demand respect, or they'll demand blood. My name is Marcus Whitehorse. I'm 78 years old now, and I'm telling you this story because I need you to understand something. The world is bigger than you think, older than you think, and there are things in the deep forests that your science can't explain. But that doesn't mean they're not real. That doesn't mean they're not watching, and that doesn't mean they've forgotten how to be angry. So, if you ever find yourself in Olympic National Forest, if you ever see a grove of trees so tall they seem to touch the sky, if you ever hear the old-timers warning you to stay away, listen to them. Because some warnings are written in blood, and some guardians never sleep. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, and I need to tell you what really happened in Pisgah National Forest in 1983. The newspapers called it a bear attack. They lied. I was 31 then, working as a park ranger for 9 years. Night patrol was my specialty. While other rangers went home to their families, I stayed in the mountains after dark. I knew every trail, every creek, every cave in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The forest was my home more than my empty apartment ever was. Being a woman in this job wasn't easy. The other rangers were good men, but they still watched me like I might break. I had to be tougher, smarter, braver than all of them. A promotion to supervisor was coming up, and I wanted it bad, real bad. I used to be a police officer in Charlotte before this. Left after a knife fight with a drug dealer went wrong. Still have the scar on my left hand to prove it. The city was too much noise, too many people, too much violence. The mountains were supposed to be peaceful. September 1983 was hot as hell. The heat wave wouldn't break, and the full moon was coming. That's when the crazy reports started flooding in. Campers talking about giant wolves walking like men. A family swore they saw something with red eyes and human hands near their tent. The local newspaper was planning a big story about dogman sightings. Bad for business, bad for tourism. The Park Service wanted it stopped fast. I drank my whiskey that night and laughed at the reports. Black bears could rear up on their hind legs. Scared campers saw what they wanted to see. Simple as that. I loaded my gear the next morning. Thermal imaging camera, night vision scope, tranquilizer rifle, professional equipment for a professional job. I'd find the bear, relocate it, and put this nonsense to rest. Old Cherokee Joe Running Bear came by the ranger station that afternoon. He was maybe 70, with eyes like dark water and hands that never stopped moving. He'd lived in these mountains his whole life. Wolf spirits are angry, he told me, voice quiet as wind through pine needles. They smell blood coming. You should stay away from the sacred places. I was polite, but firm. It's just a bear, Joe, nothing more. He looked at me for a long moment. Some things are older than rangers. Rebecca, older than Park Service, older than white men's laws. I watched him drive away in his old pickup truck. Superstition, I thought. Mountain folklore, nothing more. But that night, alone in my cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me through the windows. The forest was too quiet. No crickets, no owls, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I checked my equipment one more time. Batteries charged, rifle loaded, radio working. Tomorrow, I'd track down whatever was scaring the campers and put an end to this dogman nonsense once and for all. I was so damn sure of myself back then. So sure I knew what was real and what wasn't. The mountains have a way of teaching you different. Teaching you that some things don't care what you believe. The next morning, I found the first tracks. The prints were huge, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. But they weren't bear tracks. They had 5 toes, like human feet, but with long claws at the ends. And they were in a straight line, like something walking upright. I followed them for half a mile through thick forest. They led to a small clearing where a family had been camping 3 days ago. The same family that reported the dogman sighting. Their campsite was destroyed, not torn apart like animals would do it, arranged. The tent was shredded in perfect, parallel lines. Sleeping bags were laid out in a circle around a cold fire pit. Canned food was opened and poured out in strange patterns on the ground. I took photos and measurements. The claw marks on nearby trees were 8 feet high. Whatever made them was tall, very tall. My radio crackled with static. "Rebecca, you copy?" It was Steve Martinez, another ranger. "Good man, steady. Copy, Steve. I'm at the Morrison campsite. Found some interesting evidence. What kind of evidence? I looked at the tracks again. They were too clear, too fresh, like whatever made them wanted to be followed. Unusual bear sign. Might have a problem animal here. Need backup. Negative. I can handle it. That night, I set up my thermal imaging camera near the campsite. The heat wave was getting worse. Even after sunset, the temperature stayed above 80 degrees, perfect conditions for thermal imaging. At 11:17 p.m., something showed up on my screen. It was tall, 7 feet, maybe more. The heat signature was wrong for a bear. Too narrow, too human-shaped. But the temperature was too high. For a person, like whatever it was, had a fever. I grabbed my night vision scope and looked toward the trees. Nothing, but the thermal signature was moving, circling my position, staying just out of sight. Then I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream. It echoed through the forest like a call to prayer, or a call to war. The thermal signature stopped moving. It was looking right at me. I reached for my tranquilizer rifle, but something was wrong. The scope was fogging up. The radio was filled with static. Even my flashlight was dimming. Then I saw the eyes, red, glowing, 30 feet up in a pine tree. That's impossible, I thought. Nothing that big could climb that high. Nothing could stay that still. The eyes blinked once, then they were gone. I packed up my gear and drove back to the station. Told myself it was equipment malfunction. Told myself I was seeing things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there was playing with me. The next morning brought news that made my blood run cold. The Hendersons, a family of 4 camping near Brevard, had been found dead. Their bodies were torn apart, but not by any animal I'd ever seen. They were arranged in a pattern around their campsite, like an offering. Steve and I drove out to investigate. The scene was worse than the reports suggested. The victims weren't just killed. They were displayed, posed, like whoever did this wanted to send a message. Jesus Christ, Steve whispered, turning away from the bodies. What kind of animal does this? I studied the claw marks. 5 parallel lines, too deep for claws, too precise. The wounds were surgical, almost artistic. Not an animal, I said. Something else. That night, I went back to the woods. Steve wanted to come with me, but I told him no. This was my responsibility, my mountain, my problem to solve. I was wrong about that too. The attack happened at 2:30 a.m. I was tracking the heat signature again when my radio exploded with Steve's voice. Rebecca, Rebecca, I'm at the Henderson site. It's here. It's the transmission cut to static. Then screaming, then silence. I ran through the forest like a madwoman, crashing through branches, falling over roots. The beam of my flashlight jumped everywhere. When I reached the Henderson campsite, I found Steve on the ground, bleeding from deep claw wounds across his chest. It's not an animal, he gasped. It looked at me, really looked at me, like it knew me. What did it look like? Wolf, but standing up, hands like a person, eyes like he grabbed my arm, like it was thinking, planning. It set a trap for me, Rebecca. It knew I'd come here. I called for medical help and stayed with Steve until the helicopter arrived. Before they took him away, he grabbed my hand. There's more than one, he whispered. I saw 3 of them. They were talking to each other, without words, like they were in each other's heads. After Steve was airlifted to the hospital, I went back to the scene. I found 3 different sets of tracks. They moved in perfect formation, like soldiers, like hunters. I followed them deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone. The tracks led to a place that felt wrong. The trees were too straight, the ground was too flat. It was like nature itself was avoiding this spot. In the center of the clearing, I found something that made my hands shake. Human bones, old ones, arranged in a circle round a pile of stones. This wasn't just a hunting ground. It was a sacred place. I called Joe, running bear, from my radio. Joe, I need to know about the sacred places, the ones you mentioned. Long pause. You found the bone circle. How did you some places remember? Rebecca, remember old hurts, old promises. What did you see? I told him about the tracks, about Steve's attack, about the way the creatures moved together. Wolf spirits, Joe said quietly. Cherokee warriors, cursed long ago. They broke their promises to the tribe. Now they hunt forever, looking for peace they'll never find. That's just a story, Joe, is it? You've seen them. You know what they can do. Stories are just truth, dressed up in different clothes. That night, I didn't go home. I set up camp near the bone circle. If these things were coming back, I'd be ready. At midnight, they returned, 3 of them, tall as men but shaped like wolves. They moved without sound, like shadows with substance. Their eyes glowed red in the darkness. When they looked at me, I felt something touch my mind. A presence, ancient and angry and hungry. They didn't attack. They watched, studied, like I was a puzzle they needed to solve. The largest one, the leader, stepped closer. It had scars across its face and arms. Battle scars. Its mouth opened, showing teeth like knives, and it made a sound that wasn't quite words, but somehow I understood. You don't belong here. I raised my rifle. Neither do you. The creature tilted its head, then it smiled. Actually smiled. And I knew I was in more trouble than I'd ever been in my life. The next morning, Tom Williams, the park maintenance worker, was found hanging from a tree near the visitor center. His body was opened from throat to belly. His heart was missing. The Park Service wanted to close the entire area. Bad publicity, dangerous conditions, but I convinced them to give me 3 more days. 3 days to end this. I spent the day studying Cherokee folklore, learning about the cursed warriors, about the rituals that bound them to the mountain, about the one ceremony that might set them free. But ceremonies require sacrifice, and I was starting to understand what that meant. The final confrontation came on the 3rd night. I went to the bone circle alone, carrying only my rifle and the items Joe Running Bear had given me, sage, tobacco, and a small pouch of what he called sacred earth. If you're going to face them, he'd told me, you need to understand what they are. Not monsters, not demons, just men who made a terrible choice and got lost in the dark. The creatures were waiting for me. All 3 of them, standing in the circle like they'd been there for hours. The leader stepped forward, and this time when it spoke, I heard words. Real words. You came back. I came to end this. End what? We are already ended. We died the day we betrayed our people. This is just the echo. The other 2 creatures moved to flank me. They were beautiful in a terrible way. Muscle and fur and wild intelligence. They could have torn me apart in seconds, but they didn't. They wanted something else. Why are you killing innocent people? Innocent. The leader laughed, a sound like breaking glass. We were innocent once. We were warriors, protectors. We swore to guard our people. Then the white men came with their promises and their gold, and we chose wrong. That was a long time ago. Time means nothing to the dead. We hunt because we must. We kill because we hunger. We take hearts because ours were taken from us. The creature's eyes were so human, so full of pain and rage and loss. I realized I wasn't looking at monsters. I was looking at men who had become monsters. Men who couldn't remember how to be anything else. Joe told me about the ceremony. The one that can free you. Freedom requires sacrifice. Are you prepared to pay the price? I thought about Steve in the hospital, about the dead campers, about Tom Williams hanging from that tree, about all the people who would die if I walked away. What's the price? Your life, your heart, your spirit, joined to ours. The other 2 creatures moved closer. I could smell them now. Wild and dangerous and old. So old. There's another way, I said. Joe told me. If you remember what you were before, if you choose to let go of the anger, we tried to let go. For 100 years, we tried. But the hunger always comes back. The need to hunt, to kill, to take. What was taken from us? The leader knelt in front of me. Up close, I could see the human face beneath the wolf features. A young man, maybe 25 when he died. Handsome, proud, broken. Please, he whispered, help us remember. I knelt beside him and took out the sage, the tobacco, the sacred earth. My hands were shaking, but I remembered Joe's words. Remembered the ritual he'd taught me. What were your names? I asked. Names ... double quotes. The leader's voice was distant. I was Joseph. Joseph Crowfeather. These are my brothers. Michael, David. We were supposed to protect our people. You still can. You can choose to stop. You can choose to rest. The hunger is your choice. The killing is your choice. The anger is your choice. You can choose something else. I lit the sage and spoke the words Joe had taught me. Cherokee words I didn't understand but felt in my bones. The creatures began to change. Their wolf features softened. Their claws shortened. Their eyes lost their red glow. For a moment, they were just men, young men with tears on their faces. "Thank you," Joseph whispered. "Thank you for helping us remember." The three spirits smiled at me. Then they faded like smoke, finally free, to find whatever peace was waiting for them. I was alone in the forest, surrounded by old bones and older memories. The curse was broken. The hunting was over. But the cost was higher than I'd expected. The official report blamed the deaths on a pack of rabid bears. The park was closed for 2 weeks while animal control experts dealt with the situation. The newspapers bought the story. The tourists forgot about dogmen and went back to worrying about normal things. I kept the truth to myself. Who would believe it? Who would want to? Steve recovered from his injuries but took early retirement. He moved to Florida, said he needed to be somewhere flat and bright, somewhere without trees tall enough to hide 7-foot shadows. I stayed in the mountains. Someone needed to watch. Someone needed to remember. Joe Running Bear became my teacher. He showed me other sacred places, other old wounds that still bled. The Cherokee had been dealing with things like this for centuries. They had ceremonies for everything, rituals to keep the old darkness sleeping. I learned their ways. I learned their songs. I learned to listen to the forest with more than just my ears. The promotion never came. I didn't want it anymore. Administrative work seemed pointless after what I'd seen. What mattered was the night patrol, the watching, the knowing. I still drink whiskey in the evenings, but now I drink it with purpose. It helps quiet the memories, helps me sleep without dreaming of red eyes and human hands. Sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the forest is too quiet, I think I hear them, the pack that hunts. Joseph and his brothers, still running through the darkness, but they're not hunting anymore. They're free. I've seen other things since then, things that don't belong in any official report. The mountains are full of old stories, old promises, old curses that echo through the generations. Most of them sleep peacefully. Most of them stay where they belong, but some wake up hungry. Some remember what they've lost and want it back. That's why I'm still here, still walking the night patrol, still watching the sacred places. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to know the difference between a bear attack and something else. Someone has to be ready when the old darkness stirs. My name is Rebecca Thornfield. I'm a park ranger in Pisgah National Forest, and I'm telling you this story because the mountains have long memories. Some curses echo through generations. Some hungers never really die. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind carries sounds that don't belong to any living thing, I still hear them howling. The pack that hunts is free, but the mountain remembers everything, and so do I. My name is Daniel Morrison, and I need to tell you about the winter that changed everything I thought I knew about the world. Back in 1978, I was a ranger in the Superior National Forest in Minnesota, 41 years old. Been doing the job for 16 years. My wife Sarah had died 3 years before from cancer, leaving me to raise our twin daughters, Emma and Katie, alone. They were 15 then, smart as whips, and counting on me to keep it together long enough to help them get to college. Winter was my specialty. I had survived 3 brutal Minnesota winters where the cold can kill you in minutes. I knew how to read ice thickness, how to build emergency shelters, how to recognize the signs of hypothermia before it was too late. In my 16 years, I had rescued 23 people from winter emergencies. I was good at my job, maybe too good. I thought I knew everything the wilderness could throw at me. The thing about winter up there is that it's not just cold, it's angry. The wind cuts through you like broken glass. The snow piles up so high it buries cars whole. And when the sun goes down at 4 in the afternoon, the darkness feels alive, like it's watching you. I should have listened to the old stories. Joe Kingbird was an Ojibwe elder who sometimes helped us with search and rescue. He'd been around these woods his whole life, knew them better than any map. When I saw him at the general store that December morning, he looked worried. "Bad winter coming," he said, shaking his head. "Old things waking up. The hunger that walks on 2 legs." I smiled and nodded, the way you do when someone tells you something you don't really believe. Joe was a good man, but I figured he was just talking about the old legends, stories told around campfires to scare kids. I wore my late wife's cross around my neck, not because I was particularly religious, but because it made me feel closer to her. Sarah always said it would protect me. I touched it now, feeling the cold metal through my gloves. The radio crackled to life in my truck. "Daniel, we've got a situation. 4 hunters from Minneapolis, overdue by 72 hours. Last seen heading into the Boundary Waters area. My boss, Frank, sounded tired. Winter searches were the worst. People got lost, got cold, and died fast. These guys had been out there 3 days in 20 below weather. That was bad. I'll gear up and head out," I said, already turning my truck toward the station. "Their wives are calling every hour," Frank added. "Kids asking when daddy's coming home. You know how it is." I knew. I'd been the guy making those calls before, telling families their loved ones weren't coming back. It never got easier. At the station, I loaded my gear: Arctic sleeping bag, emergency shelter, extra batteries, flare gun, radio beacon. My snowmobile was gassed up and ready. I'd done this dance before. The wind was picking up when I headed out. The weather service was calling for a blizzard, with wind chills hitting 40 below. Not good conditions for a search, but I'd worked in worse. The last anyone had seen of the 4 men was at Johnson's Outfitters, where they'd bought supplies, and asked about good hunting spots. Johnson said they seemed experienced, had good gear, but experience doesn't mean much when nature decides to kill you. I found their truck about 2 hours into the search. It was still running, doors hanging, open, snow drifting inside. The rifles were still in their cases in the back. That was strange. If you're hunting and something goes wrong, you don't leave your weapons behind. The snow around the truck was all churned up, but I couldn't make out clear footprints. The wind had been blowing for days, covering tracks. I radioed back to base, found their vehicle. Looks like they left in a hurry. Any sign of where they went? I looked around. The woods were silent, except for the wind. Too silent. Usually you'd hear birds, or squirrels, or something, but it was like every living thing had left. "I'll follow what tracks I can find," I said, "but this wind's been erasing everything." That's when I should have turned back. That's when I should have listened to the feeling in my gut that something was very wrong. But I was Daniel Morrison, winter survival expert. I'd saved 23 people. I thought I could handle anything these woods could throw at me. I had no idea what was hunting in those trees. The snowshoe trail led deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thick and the shadows never seemed to lift, even in daylight. I followed it for about a mile before I found the cabin. It was an old hunting cabin, the kind that had been built back in the 50s, but something was wrong with it. The door wasn't just open, it was torn right off its hinges. The wood was splintered like something incredibly strong had ripped it away. I approached carefully, my hand instinctively moving to the cross around my neck. The inside of the cabin looked like a tornado had hit it. Furniture was overturned, supplies scattered everywhere. But what made my blood run cold were the dark stains on the walls. Blood, a lot of it. I pulled out my flashlight and looked around, more carefully. The strange thing was, there were no animal tracks in the snow outside. Bears hibernate in winter. Wolves would have left tracks, but there was nothing. "Hello," I called out, even though I knew no one would answer. "Anyone here?" The silence was so complete, it hurt my ears. I'd been in quiet places before, but this was different. This was the silence of things hiding. I tried my radio. "Base, this is Daniel. Found a cabin, signs of trouble. No survivors visible, nothing but static." I adjusted the frequency. Tried again, more static. That was odd. My radio had been working fine an hour ago. Outside, I found the bones. They were scattered around the cabin like someone had had a picnic. But these weren't animal bones. They were human, and they'd been gnawed clean, cracked open like someone had been trying to get at the marrow inside. I've seen a lot of things. In my time as a ranger, I've found bodies, dealt with bear attacks, seen what happens when people freeze to death. But this was different. This was something that had eaten people. My flashlight started to flicker. I banged it against my palm, but the light kept dimming. The batteries were fresh. I'd put them in that morning. But in the cold, they were dying like they'd been in there for months. That's when I felt it. The feeling of being watched. I turned around slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. Something was out there, looking at me. I decided to set up camp nearby and wait for morning. Whatever had happened here, I'd have a better chance of figuring it out in daylight. I pitched my emergency shelter about 50 yards from the cabin, in a clearing where I could see anyone approaching. As I was setting up, I heard it for the first time. A howl. but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was long and mournful, like a person crying out in pain, but there was something else in it, something that made every hair on my body stand up. It sounded hungry. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the trees. I grabbed my flare gun and stood, perfectly still, listening. The howl came again, closer this time, and now I could tell it was moving, circling around my position. I radioed for backup. "Base, this is Daniel. I need assistance out here. Something's not right." This time, I got through. Frank's voice crackled back. "What's your situation?" "I think I found where the hunters went, and I think something killed them." There was a pause. "Something, I'm not sure what, but I'm requesting backup. Send Julie with the dog team. She's already on her way. ETA, 30 minutes. I felt better knowing help was coming. Julie Hartwell was a good ranger, experienced with winter rescues, and her dogs could track anything. I spent the next hour sitting in my shelter, listening to the wind and trying not to think about those bones. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every sound made me jump. When I finally heard the snowmobiles approaching, I was never so happy to see another human being. Julie pulled up with her team of 3 search dogs. She was bundled up in Arctic gear, but I could see her breath steaming in the cold. "What have we got?" she asked, pulling off her helmet. I filled her in on what I'd found: the abandoned truck, the destroyed cabin, the bones. She listened without interrupting, her face getting more serious with each detail. "You think bears?" she asked. "Bears don't tear doors off hinges, and they don't crack human bones to get at the marrow." The dogs were acting strange. Usually, they'd be excited, ready to work, but they were whining and staying close to Julie, their tails between their legs. "They smell something," Julie said. "Something that's got them spooked." We decided to split up. Julie would take the dogs and follow any scent trails she could find. I would search the cabin area more thoroughly, look for clues about what had happened to the 4 hunters. "Stay in radio contact," I told her, "and if you see anything unusual, anything at all, you call me immediately." She nodded and headed off with her dogs into the darker part of the forest. I watched her go, the beam of her flashlight disappearing between the trees. That was the last time I saw Julie Hartwell alive. About an hour later, I heard her voice calling my name, but something was wrong. The voice was coming from the wrong direction, from deeper in the woods where she shouldn't have been. "Daniel, Daniel, help me." I grabbed my gear and headed toward the sound, but as I got closer, I realized something that made my blood freeze. The voice was too clear, too loud. In this wind, at this distance, I shouldn't have been able to hear her that well. "Julie," I called back. "Where are you?" "Over here. I'm hurt. Please hurry." I followed the voice, but every time I got close, it seemed to move further away. And the dogs, I should have been able to hear the dogs, but there was only that voice, calling my name over and over. I finally found her 20 minutes later, but not the way I expected. Julie was hanging from a tree branch, about 8 feet off the ground. Her body was torn open, and parts of her were missing. But what scared me most was that she was still warm. In 20 below weather, a dead body should freeze solid in minutes. But Julie's blood was still liquid, still dripping into the snow. The dogs were nowhere to be found. I stood there in the falling snow, staring up at what was left of my colleague, and finally understood what Joe Kingbird had been trying to tell me. Something was hunting in these woods. Something that wasn't natural. Something that was still very, very hungry. And now it knew I was here. I cut Julie down and wrapped her body in my emergency tarp. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something watching me from the trees, but there was nothing except shadows and falling snow. My radio crackled to life. "Daniel, this is Base. How's the search going?" I hesitated. How do you explain that something impossible had killed your partner? How do you tell people that the legends are real? "We've got casualties," I said finally. "Julie's dead. Something attacked her." "What kind of something?" "Bear wolf pack." I looked at the tarp-wrapped body. No bear did this. No wolf could have lifted a full-grown woman 8 feet into a tree. "I'm not sure, but I need more backup, and I need it now." "Negative. Storm's getting worse. We can't get anyone else out there until it passes." I was alone with whatever was hunting these woods. The wind was picking up, and the snow was falling. Heavier. I needed to find shelter, somewhere I could defend myself. The cabin was destroyed, but there was a ranger station about 3 miles north. If I could make it there, I'd have radio equipment and supplies. I started packing my gear, but then I heard it again. That howl, long and mournful. But this time, there was something different about it. It sounded almost ... satisfied. I grabbed my snowshoes and started moving. The beam of my flashlight cut through the swirling snow, but it felt like trying to see through soup. Every few steps, I had to stop and check my compass. In a whiteout like this, you can walk in circles and never know it. That's when I saw the tracks. They were huge, at least 20 inches long and 8 inches wide, but they weren't bear tracks. They were almost human-shaped, but wrong. Instead of toes, there were long claw marks, and the stride was impossible, nearly 8 feet between prints. Whatever made these tracks was big, fast, and walking on 2 legs. I followed the tracks for about 100 yards before I realized they were following me. The creature had been walking parallel to my path, staying just out of sight in the trees, and now the tracks were getting closer to my trail. I stopped and pulled out my flare gun. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. "I know you're out there," I shouted into the wind. "Show yourself." The forest went completely silent. Even the wind seemed to die down. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard Julie's voice. Again, "Daniel, where are you? I'm lost." I spun around, but there was nothing there, just trees and snow and darkness. "Daniel, please help me, I'm hurt." The voice was perfect. It sounded exactly like Julie, scared and in pain. But I'd wrapped Julie's body in a tarp not an hour ago. Whatever was making that sound, it wasn't human. I started running. The snow was knee-deep, and running in snowshoes is like trying to run with tennis rackets strapped to your feet. But fear gave me strength. Behind me, I could hear something crashing through the underbrush, keeping pace with me easily. I reached the ranger station just as my lungs were about to give out. The building was dark and cold, but it was solid. I fumbled with my keys, got the door open, and slammed it shut behind me. The radio equipment was old but functional. I managed to raise the main station. "This is Daniel Morrison, emergency frequency. I need immediate evacuation from the North Station." "Daniel, this is Frank. What's your situation?" "The hunters are dead. Julie's dead. There's something in the woods that's killing people." "What kind of something?" I looked out the window at the swirling snow. "How do you explain a nightmare?" I think it might be a Wendigo." There was a long pause. "Daniel, you're talking about Indian legends. You've been out in the cold too long. You're hypothermic." "I'm not hypothermic. I know what I saw. Just sit tight. We'll come get you when the storm passes." The radio went dead. I tried to raise them again, but got nothing but static. I was alone. I spent the next few hours barricading the windows and doors. The station had some emergency supplies, canned food, water, a first aid kit, but no real weapons except an old hunting rifle that a previous ranger had left behind. Around midnight, I heard scratching on the walls. It started soft, like tree branches scraping in the wind. But then it got louder, more deliberate. Something was walking round the building, dragging its claws along the wood. I grabbed the rifle and went to the window. Outside, I could see a shape moving in the snow. It was tall, much taller than a man, and thin like it hadn't eaten in months. But it moved with a grace that was completely wrong for something so large. Then it looked at me. Its eyes were white, like snow, but they glowed with their own light. Its face was gaunt, almost skull-like, with yellowed teeth that were too long and too sharp. But the worst part was that it looked almost human, like someone who had been twisted into something horrible. It smiled at me and waved. I fired the rifle through the window. The glass exploded outward, and the creature vanished into the storm. But I could hear it laughing, a sound like wind through dead leaves. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner, the rifle across my knees, listening to the thing circle the building. Sometimes it would scratch at the walls. Sometimes it would call out in Julie's voice, begging for help. Once, it spoke in a man's voice I didn't recognize, probably one of the dead hunters. When the sun finally came up, the sound stopped. I waited until full daylight before I dared to look outside. The creature was gone, but it had left me a message. Arranged in the snow in front of the building were bones, human bones, picked clean, and written in the snow in what looked like blood were words in a language I didn't recognize. But somehow I understood what they meant. Still hungry, I knew I couldn't stay at the station. The creature had found me there once, and it would be back. I had to keep moving, try to make it to the main road where maybe someone would find me. I gathered what supplies I could carry and headed out into the morning light. The storm had passed, but the cold was brutal. Every breath felt like breathing broken glass. I'd been walking for about an hour when I found the last of the hunters. Mike Thompson was hanging from a tree, just like Julie had been, but he was still alive, barely. His eyes were open, staring at me with desperate hope. "Help," he whispered. "Please." I climbed up and cut him down. He was in bad shape, frostbite, severe hypothermia, and something had been feeding on him, but he was conscious. "What happened?" I asked, wrapping him in my spare blanket. It used to be a person," he gasped. Dave, Dave Kowalski. He was with us. We got lost, ran out of food. He ate the others. Then he changed. I felt ice in my veins that had nothing to do with the weather. "One of your group?" Mike nodded weakly. "We were starving. Been lost for days." Dave said he found meat, but it was Tom. Dave had killed Tom and was eating him. We tried to stop him, but he was so strong. And then he changed, got taller, thinner. His eyes went white. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It's still hungry. It's always hungry, and it wants you now." Before I could ask what he meant, Mike's eyes went wide, staring at something behind me. I turned around and saw the creature standing at the edge of the clearing in daylight. It was even more horrible. It stood nearly 9 feet tall, but couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. Its skin was grey and stretched tight over its bones. Its fingers ended in claws that were at least 6 inches long, and its mouth was full of teeth that looked like they'd been filed to points. But the worst part was its eyes. They were completely white, but I could see intelligence in them. "This thing had once been human, Dave," I said. The creature tilted its head, almost like it remembered the name. Then it smiled, showing all those terrible teeth. "Hungry," it said in a voice like winter wind. "So hungry." Mike tried to run, but he was too weak. The creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. One moment it was 20 feet away. The next it was on top of him. I didn't stay to watch. I ran toward the frozen lake, hoping the open ground would give me an advantage. But as I reached the ice, I heard Mike screaming behind me. The sound cut off abruptly. I was about halfway across the lake when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. The ice was making sounds underneath me, creaking and groaning. It was too thin to support my weight for long. Behind me, the creature was walking onto the ice, but it was so light that it barely left footprints. It was grinning at me, taking its time. "Hungry," it said again. "Been hungry so long." The ice cracked. Under my feet, I could feel it giving way, ready to dump me into water so cold it would kill me in minutes. "You were human once," I said, backing away carefully. "You were Dave Kowalski. You had a family, a life." The creature stopped and tilted its head again. For a moment, something almost human flickered in those white eyes. "Dave," it whispered. "Dave is ... hungry. You don't have to be this thing," I said. "You can fight it." But the human looked faded, replaced by pure predatory hunger. The creature crouched, ready to spring. That's when the ice gave way. I plunged into water so cold it felt like liquid fire. The shock of it drove all the air from my lungs. My heavy winter clothes were dragging me down, and I couldn't feel my arms or legs. I was drowning, and there was nothing I could do about it. But then I remembered my flare gun. With fingers that barely worked, I managed to pull it from my coat. The creature was standing at the edge of the hole, reaching down for me with those horrible claws. I fired the flare straight up. The bright red flame shot out of the water and hit the creature in the chest. It shrieked and stumbled backward, its clothes catching fire. The flare landed on the ice and kept burning, casting everything in hellish red light. The creature was rolling in the snow, trying to put out the flames, but the fire seemed to hurt it more than it should have. It was writhing and screaming like the flames were eating it alive. I managed to pull myself out of the water and crawled away from the hole. My clothes were already starting to freeze solid. I had minutes before hypothermia killed me. The creature was still burning, but it was getting back to its feet. The fire had hurt it, but it wasn't dead. And now it was angry. It started walking toward me, its clothes still smoldering. I could see the hate in its white eyes. But then the sun came out from behind a cloud, and something amazing happened. The creature stopped and looked up at the sky. The sunlight seemed to cause it pain. It was squinting and covering its eyes. It looked back at me one more time, and I swear I saw something human in its face. something that might have been regret. Then it turned and ran for the tree line, moving so fast it was just a blur. In seconds, it was gone. I lay there on the ice, shivering uncontrollably, and watched the sun climb higher in the sky. The creature was gone, but I knew it wasn't dead. It was just waiting for darkness to fall again. I had to get out of these woods before that happened. I barely made it back to the main road. A snowplowed driver found me collapsed in a ditch, half frozen and mumbling about cannibals in the woods. They rushed me to the hospital in Duluth, where I spent 3 days in intensive care being treated for severe hypothermia and frostbite. The official report said that the 4 hunters had died of exposure. Julie Hartwell was listed as a victim of a bear attack. Despite the fact that bears don't hunt in winter, the area was closed to the public for safety reasons, and that was that. I tried to tell people what really happened, but who's going to believe a story about a Wendigo? The doctors said I was suffering from hypothermia-induced hallucinations. My boss said I was having a breakdown from the stress of losing my partner. Everyone had a rational explanation for what I'd seen, but I knew the truth, and I knew that thing was still out there, still hungry. I couldn't stay in Minnesota after that. Every time winter came, I'd start having nightmares about white eyes and yellowed teeth. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, feeling like something was watching me from the darkness. I transferred to a ranger station in Arizona, where it's warm and the nights are short. My daughters didn't understand why I suddenly wanted to move to the desert, but they came with me. I never told them what really happened in those woods. The frostbite cost me 3 toes and the tips of 2 fingers. I lost some hearing in my left ear from the cold, but the worst damage was to my mind. I couldn't eat meat anymore. Every time I tried, I'd think about those bones scattered around the cabin. I couldn't stand the cold, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow Dave Kowalski was still out there, still hungry. I warned other rangers about the area. I told them about the Wendigo, about what happens when people get so hungry they'll eat anything. Most of them thought I was crazy, but a few listened. A few took the warnings seriously. Every winter, I get reports from Minnesota. Missing hunters, unexplained deaths, rangers who go into the woods and never come back. The area around that lake is still closed to the public, but that doesn't stop people from going there. I'm retired now, living in Phoenix where the sun shines, 300 days a year, but I still wear my wife's cross around my neck, and I still have nightmares about that winter in 1978. People ask me sometimes if I regret becoming a ranger. I tell them no. I saved 23 people in my career. I'm proud of that, but there's one person I couldn't save. Dave Kowalski is still out there in those woods, still hungry, still hunting, and every winter, he finds new victims. So let me tell you something, and I want you to remember it. If you ever find yourself lost in the woods, hungry and desperate, don't give in to the darkness. Don't become something that feeds on others, because once you cross that line, once you taste human flesh, there's no going back. The hunger never stops. It just gets worse. And somewhere in the Superior National Forest, something that used to be human is still walking through the snow, still looking for its next meal. Some hungers can never be satisfied. Daniel Morrison passed away in 2019 at the age of 82. He never returned to Minnesota. The area around the lake where these events occurred remains closed to the public. Local Ojibwe elders still warn people about the hunger that walks on 2 legs. If you're ever in those woods and you hear someone calling your name, don't answer. Just keep walking and don't look back. My name is Vincent Ashford, and I need to tell you about what happened in Death Valley in 1959. People say I'm crazy now, but I know what I saw out there in the desert. I know what killed my friends. I was 38 years old then, a park ranger with 14 years of service. Death Valley was my home. I knew every rock, every dangerous spot, every place where water could save your life. The desert didn't scare me anymore. Maybe it should have. My wife Sarah was sick that summer. The doctors said she needed surgery, but we didn't have the money. With 3 kids to feed and college coming up, every dollar mattered. That's why I took the extra jobs. That's why I said yes when the university called about their missing team. I remember the morning clearly. August heat was already building at 6 a.m. The phone rang in the ranger station, and I answered it with my coffee, still steaming. "This is Professor Williams from UC Berkeley." The voice said, "We have a problem. A geology team had gone missing." for researchers studying the moving rocks at Racetrack Playa. They were supposed to check in every day, but it had been 3 days of silence. The university was worried. Grant money was on the line. The rocks that move by themselves. I asked. People came from all over to see those stones. Big rocks that somehow slid across the flat desert floor, leaving long trails behind them. Nobody knew how they moved. Yes, those rocks. Our team was documenting the phenomenon. Now they're gone. I told the professor I'd find them. In those days, people got lost in Death Valley all the time. The heat killed them, or they ran out of water, or they just walked in circles until they died. I'd rescued 31 people from the desert over the years. This would be number 32 through 30. But as I packed my gear, something felt wrong. The air was too still, no wind at all, which was strange for August. Even the lizards seemed to be hiding. My dog Rex, who usually loved coming on desert trips, whined and refused to get in the truck. I should have listened to him. Before I left, old Joe Crowfeather stopped by the station. He was Shoshone, one of the few who still remembered the old stories. He looked worried. "You going to the place where rocks dance?" he asked. "The racetrack?" "Yeah. Got some missing scientists." Joe shook his head. "Bad time to go there. The pale ones are stirring." I laughed. Joe was always talking about spirits and old legends. "Come on, Joe. It's just hot air and mirages out there." "No," he said seriously. "The pale ones who steal warmth. They guard the deep places. When the heat gets too strong, they wake up." I thanked him and drove away. I was a practical man. I believed in what I could see and touch. Dehydration and heat stroke killed people in the desert, not ghosts. The drive to Racetrack Playa took 2 hours. The temperature was already hitting 115 degrees, and it wasn't even noon. I had plenty of water, a radio, and all my survival gear. I knew the desert better than anyone, but as I drove deeper into Death Valley, the feeling that something was wrong got stronger. The silence was too complete. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the sound of my truck engine and the heat waves dancing off the road. I found their camp at the edge of the playa for tents, perfectly set up, with all their equipment arranged in neat rows, but no people, no signs of struggle, no footprints. Leading away, what bothered me most was how their rock samples were arranged. The scientists had been collecting stones to study, but now the rocks were laid out in perfect patterns, geometric shapes that hurt to look at, symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. No scientist would arrange rocks like that. It looked more like ... like an altar. I called out, but my voice seemed to die in the still air. The echo I expected never came back. Instead, there was just silence, and underneath it, something that might have been whispering. I checked my thermometer, 125 degrees, but I felt cold. I radioed back to headquarters to report the empty camp. The response came back full of static, but I could make out the words. "Send backup. Don't go alone." Too late for that advice. I was already here, and those people needed help. I started following the tire tracks from their jeep. They led straight toward the center of the playa, where the moving rocks were. As I walked, I noticed something strange about the ground. The mud was cracked in patterns, like someone had drawn shapes in it while it was wet, but there hadn't been rain in Death Valley for months. The tracks ended at a cluster of rocks that had moved recently. I could see the long trails behind them, showing where they'd slid across the flat ground. But these rocks were different. They were arranged in a perfect circle, each one exactly the same distance from the others. In the center of the circle, I found Dr. Amanda Ross. She was the team leader, a woman in her 50s who'd been studying desert geology for 20 years. I'd met her when she first arrived, and she'd seemed tough and experienced. Now she was curled up in a ball, shivering. In 125-degree heat, she was shivering. Dr. Rossi knelt beside her. Her skin was ice cold. Her lips were blue. "What happened? Where are the others?" She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "They're so cold," she whispered. "They're so cold, and they're hungry." "Who's cold? Your team?" "No." She grabbed my arm with fingers that felt like ice. "The tall ones, the pale ones. They came out of the ground when the sun got high. They're so cold, Vincent. They're so cold, they burn." I looked around. We were completely alone on the flat desert floor. No shade, no place to hide. The heat was making the air shimmer, but I couldn't see anyone else. "Dr. Ross, you're having heat stroke. We need to get you to shade and get some water in you." "No," she said, still shivering. They'll come back when the shadows get long. They don't like the bright sun, but they can stand it for a while. Just long enough to hunt. I tried to help her stand, but she was too weak. Her body temperature was dangerously low. In the middle of Death Valley, in August, this woman was dying of cold. That's when I heard the sound. It was like wind, but there was no wind. Like breathing, but too big to be human. It seemed to come from underground, from the cracks in the dried mud. Dr. Ross heard it too. She started crying. "They're coming back," she said. "Oh God, they're coming back." I looked around the flat expanse of the playa. Nothing but heat shimmer and distant mountains. But the sound was getting louder, and the temperature was dropping. My breath started to fog in the 120-degree air. "We need to move," I said. Now, I picked up Dr. Ross and started carrying her toward my truck. She was light, too light, like the cold had somehow drained the substance out of her. Behind us, the breathing sound grew louder. I looked back once. The rock circle was still empty, but the air above it was wrong. It bent and twisted like heat shimmer, but it was moving against the wind, and in that twisted air, I saw shapes. Tall, pale shapes that didn't quite look real. "Don't look at them," Dr. Ross whispered. "Don't let them see you looking." But I couldn't help myself. The shapes were getting clearer. They were human-like, but too tall, too thin. Their skin was white as bone, and they moved like they were underwater, and they were coming toward us. I ran. I made it to the truck and got Dr. Ross inside. She was getting colder by the minute. I turned on the heater full blast, but it didn't seem to help. She was shivering so hard she couldn't speak. I drove as fast as I could toward the main road. In the rearview mirror, I could see the pale shapes following us. They moved fast, too fast for walking. They glided across the desert floor like they were skating on ice. But as we got farther from the playa, they stopped. They just stood there, watching us go. And then they faded back into the heat shimmer like they'd never been there at all. Dr. Ross died before we reached the hospital. The doctors said it was impossible. They said no one could freeze to death in Death Valley in August. They said it must have been something else. But I felt her skin. I saw her breath fog in the desert heat, and I saw what was chasing us. The other 3 members of her team were never found. The official report said they died of heat exposure, but their bodies were never recovered. The area around Racetrack Playa was quietly closed to researchers. I should have left it alone. I should have listened to the warnings and stayed away. But I couldn't stop thinking about those pale shapes and the way they moved. And I couldn't stop wondering if they were still out there, waiting in the heat. 2 weeks later, I got a call. Another research team had gone missing in the same area. This time, it was oil company geologists looking for drilling sites. I knew I had to go back. Carl Dobson came with me the second time. He was a younger ranger, only been in Death Valley for 3 years, but he was tough and reliable. When I told him what I'd seen, he didn't laugh or call me crazy. He just nodded and packed extra water. "If there's something out there killing people," he said, "we need to stop it." We drove to the playa at dawn, hoping to search in the cooler morning air. But even at sunrise, the temperature was already over 100 degrees. The heat wave was getting worse. This time we found the missing team's equipment scattered across a wider area. Their drilling samples were arranged in the same geometric patterns I'd seen before. Perfect circles, triangles, and shapes that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "This is organized," Carl said, examining the rock arrangements. "Someone's doing this on purpose." "Something," I corrected. "I don't think it's human." We followed the tire tracks again, but this time they led in a different direction, toward the old mining caves on the far side of the playa. The tracks ended at a hole in the ground that I'd never seen before. It looked freshly dug, like something had burst up from underground. "Should we go down?" Carl asked. I looked into the hole. It was perfectly round, about 6 feet across, and it went down at a steep angle. The walls were smooth, like they'd been carved by tools, but no human tools could make cuts that perfect. "No," I said. "We call for backup first." But when I tried the radio, all I got was static. The equipment that had worked perfectly 20 minutes ago was now dead. "Must be interference from the minerals," Carl said. "This whole area is full of strange rocks." As we walked back toward the truck, the air started to change. The temperature dropped suddenly, from 115 to maybe 90 degrees. Our breath began to fog, and underneath our feet, the ground started to vibrate. "Earthquake?" Carl asked. But it wasn't random shaking. It was rhythmic, like something huge was breathing under the desert floor. The vibrations were coming from the direction of the hole. Then we saw them. They came out of the ground like pale flowers blooming in reverse. First, just their heads, white and smooth and featureless. Then their shoulders, impossibly thin and long. They rose up out of the desert floor itself, not from holes or cracks, but straight through the solid rock. There were dozens of them. They formed a circle around us, about 50 yards away. They were tall, maybe 8 feet, and they moved without walking. They just glided across the ground like they were made of mist. "Run," I whispered. But Carl was frozen, staring at the creatures. "What are they?" "Run." We ran toward the truck, but the pale things moved faster. They cut us off, forming a wall between us and escape. Up close, I could see they had no faces, just smooth white skin where features should be. But somehow, knew they were looking at us. The temperature kept dropping. My hands were getting numb. Carl's lips were turning blue. "They're cold," he said. "God, they're so cold." One of the creatures reached out toward Carl, its arms stretched like rubber, getting longer and longer. When it touched him, Carl screamed. Ice crystals formed on his skin where it touched. The creature's hand was so cold it burned. Carl fell to his knees, shivering uncontrollably. "Vincent," he gasped. I can't, I can't feel my legs." I grabbed him under the arms and tried to drag him away, but more creatures were reaching for us. Everywhere they touched, ice formed. The desert ground cracked with frost. I pulled out my flare gun and fired it at the nearest creature. The bright red light seemed to hurt it. It pulled back, making a sound like wind through empty caves. "The light," I shouted. "They don't like bright light." I fired another flare, then another. The creatures retreated, but they didn't go far. They just waited at the edge of the light, watching us with their blank faces. Carl was getting worse. His skin was turning blue, and he couldn't stop shivering. In the middle of Death Valley, in August, he was dying of cold. "Vincent," he whispered, "don't let them take me underground. Whatever happens, don't let them take me down there." I promised him I wouldn't, but I was running out of flares. When the last flare died, the creatures moved in. They surrounded Carl, their long arms reaching out to touch him. Everywhere they touched, ice formed. He screamed once, then went silent. When they pulled away, Carl was frozen solid. His eyes were open, but they were covered with frost. His skin was white as snow. In the 110-degree heat, he had been flash frozen. The creatures looked at me with their blank faces. Then, slowly, they began to sink back into the ground. In seconds, they were gone, leaving only Carl's frozen body and the memory of their terrible cold. I picked up Carl and carried him to the truck. He was so cold he burned my hands, but I wouldn't leave him there. I drove back to town as fast as I could, but I knew it was too late. The doctors said it was impossible, just like they'd said about Dr. Ross, but I had seen it happen. That night, I called Joe Crowfeather. I needed answers. "The pale ones," he said, when I described what I'd seen. "My grandfather told me about them. They live deep under the desert, where it's always cold. They're the desert's way of protecting itself." Protecting itself from what? From us. From people who want to take too much. The miners, the oil companies, the scientists who won't leave the sacred places alone. When too many people come, the pale ones wake up. They make the desert too cold for human life. How do I stop them? Joe was quiet for a long time. "You can't stop them, Vincent. You can only survive them. But they're getting stronger. The more people they take, the more they can do. Soon, they won't need to stay underground during the day." I thought about Dr. Ross and Carl, both frozen in the desert heat. I thought about the missing research teams and the oil company geologists. How many people had the pale ones taken? "There's something else," Joe said. "My grandfather said they can smell fear, and they can smell people who've seen them before. They'll come for you, Vincent. They'll come for you next." That night, I felt cold for the first time in weeks. Even with the heater on and extra blankets, I couldn't get warm. Outside, the desert was still over 100 degrees, but inside my house, I could see my breath. They were coming for me. 3 days later, I went back to the playa. I had to. The cold was getting worse, following me everywhere. My house, my truck, even the ranger station felt like a freezer. I knew the pale ones were calling me back. This time, I came prepared. I brought every flare I could find. 3 flashlights, a signal mirror, and a thermos of hot coffee. If bright light hurt them, I'd give them all the light they could handle. I also brought something else. Joe Crowfeather had given me a pouch of something he called warm stones. They were small black rocks that had been sitting in the sun for days. They felt hot to the touch. Desert spirits, he said. The opposite of the pale ones. They might help, but probably not for long. The playa was different when I arrived. The mud was cracked in perfect patterns, forming symbols that covered the entire flat area. The symbols seemed to glow with their own pale light, even in the bright sun. In the center of the patterns, the ground was bulging upward. Something big was moving underneath. I parked at the edge of the playa and got out. The air was wrong again. Too still, too quiet, and cold, even though the sun was blazing overhead. The ground split open. It happened all at once, like a flower blooming in fast motion. The desert floor peeled back in perfect sections, revealing a hole maybe 100 feet across. And from that hole, the pale ones rose. There were more of them than I'd ever seen. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They flowed out of the ground like cold water, filling the space between me and my truck. Their blank faces all turned toward me at the same time. But these weren't the same creatures I'd seen before. These were bigger, more solid. Their skin wasn't just pale, it was covered in frost. Ice crystals hung from their long arms. When they breathed, clouds of freezing air came out. I understood what Joe had meant. They were getting stronger. The largest one, maybe 9 feet tall, glided toward me. When it moved, the ground froze under its feet. Ice spread out in perfect circles. With each step, I fired a flare at it. The creature paused, but it didn't retreat. The bright light seemed to hurt it, but not enough to stop it. I fired another flare, then another. The creatures slowed down, but they kept coming. I was running out of flares, and they knew it. The big one reached out toward me. Its arms stretched like rubber, getting longer and longer. I could feel the cold radiating from it, burning my skin like fire. That's when I remembered the signal mirror. I pulled it out and angled it toward the sun. The reflected light hit the creature square in the face. It screamed a sound like wind through ice. Kevzan jerked back. The mirror worked better than the flares. The concentrated sunlight seemed to actually hurt them. I kept the beam focused on the big creature, and it retreated, but there were too many of them. While I was focused on one, others moved in from the sides. I felt their cold touch on my arms, my back. Ice crystals formed on my skin. My body temperature started dropping fast. I could feel my heart slowing down, my thoughts getting fuzzy. I was freezing to death in the middle of Death Valley. Why? I shouted at them. Why are you doing this? The answer came not as words, but as images in my mind. I saw the desert as it used to be, pure, empty, untouched. I saw the pale ones sleeping deep underground, keeping the desert cold and lifeless in the deep places. Then I saw the miners come, the oil companies, the scientists with their drilling equipment. Each time humans tried to take something from the desert, the pale ones had to wake up and drive them away. They weren't evil. They were protectors. The desert's immune system, fighting off an infection, and the infection was us. But knowing why didn't make them less dangerous. My vision was starting to blur. The cold was reaching my heart. I had maybe minutes left. I angled the mirror toward the sun again, trying to get the brightest reflection possible. The beam hit the big creature, and this time it did more than just hurt it. The creature's skin began to steam. It was melting. I realized something. They weren't just hurt by light, they were hurt by heat. Real heat, concentrated heat. And in Death Valley, in August, the sun was the most powerful heat source in the world. I started using the mirror like a weapon, focusing the sunlight on one creature after another. Where the beam hit, they melted like ice. They screamed and retreated, sinking back into the ground, but I couldn't get them all, and the effort was exhausting me. My hands were shaking from the cold, making it hard to aim the mirror. The big creature made one last attempt. It rushed toward me, its arms stretched out wide. I could feel the deadly cold radiating from it, promising to freeze me solid in seconds. I focused every bit of sunlight I could onto its face. The mirror beam hit it like a laser, and the creature's head began to melt. It screamed and fell backward, dissolving into mist. The other creatures saw their leader fall. They looked at me with their blank faces, and I could feel their fear. They were ancient, powerful, but they weren't invincible. The sun was stronger than they were. Slowly, they began to sink back into the ground. The big hole in the center of the playa closed up, the desert floor sealing itself like it had never been opened. In minutes, I was alone on the playa. The ice melted quickly in the heat, leaving only damp patches on the ground. If I hadn't lived through it, I would have thought it was all a dream. But I knew they weren't gone. They were just waiting, sleeping, under the desert until the next time someone tried to take too much from their domain. I walked back to my truck on shaking legs. My body temperature was slowly returning to normal, but I knew I'd never be the same. The cold had gotten into my bones, into my soul. As I drove away, I looked back at the playa one last time. The rock formations were back to normal, scattered randomly across the flat ground, but I could still see the patterns underneath, the symbols that marked their territory. Death Valley looked peaceful again, but I knew the truth. Under the burning sand, the pale ones were waiting, always waiting. I put in for a transfer the next day, told my supervisor I needed a change of climate for my wife's health. He didn't question if everyone knew about Sarah's medical bills. We moved to Oregon, where it rains most of the year and the temperature never gets above 80 degrees. I got a job with the Forest Service, working in the cool, green mountains, as far from Death Valley as I could get, but the cold followed me. Even now, 20 years later, I can't get warm. I wear sweaters in July. I keep the house heater running year-round. My wife thinks it's just getting old, but I know better. The pale ones left their mark on me. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, I wake up and see my breath fogging in the bedroom. I know they're thinking about me, remembering the man who fought back, the man who hurt them. I still have the signal mirror. I keep it by my bed, just in case. The official reports said the missing people died of heat exposure. The government closed the area around Racetrack Playa for public safety, but they never said why. The mining companies stopped drilling in that part of Death Valley. The oil companies moved their operations to other areas. I think the pale ones won. They protected their territory, but the cost was high. Carl Dobson was buried with full honors. His wife got a pension, and his kids got college money. The same with Dr. Ross and the other scientists. Their families still don't know what really killed them. I could have told them. I could have told everyone. But who would believe me? A man who claims people can freeze to death in Death Valley in August. A man who says there are ice creatures living under the desert. So I kept quiet. I wrote my reports, attended the funerals, and took my transfer. I let the world think I was just another ranger who couldn't handle the heat. But I know the truth. And sometimes, the truth is a burden you carry alone. Joe Crowfeather died 3 years after I left Death Valley. Before he passed, he sent me a letter. In it, he wrote, "The pale ones are sleeping again, but they remember you. They remember the man who brought fire to the cold places. If you ever go back to the desert, they'll be waiting. But you hurt them, Vincent. You showed them that humans can fight back. Maybe that's enough. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if the pale ones will stay sleeping, or if they'll wake up again when the desert gets too crowded. All I know is that there are places in this world that don't want us there. Places that will fight back if we push too hard. Death Valley is one of those places. It looks empty, harmless, like just another desert. But under the sand, under the rocks, the pale ones are waiting, always waiting. My grandchildren ask me sometimes why I never take them camping in the desert. They see pictures of Death Valley online and think it looks exciting, hot and dry and full of adventure. I tell them the desert is dangerous. I tell them about the heat, the lack of water, the easy ways to get lost. All true things. But I don't tell them about the cold. I don't tell them about the pale ones who steal warmth from living things. Maybe that's cowardice. Maybe I should warn them. But I hope they never have to know. I hope they never have to feel that bone-deep cold in the middle of summer, or see those blank faces rising from the ground. The desert keeps its secrets, and maybe that's for the best. But if you ever find yourself in Death Valley, and you see rocks arranged in perfect patterns, or feel cold air on a hot day, or hear breathing, sounds from underground, don't investigate. Don't try to explain it away. Just leave. Drive away, and don't look back. Some places are too dangerous for human life. Some places have guardians that don't want us there. The pale ones are real. They're waiting under the sand, sleeping in the cold places deep underground. And they remember everyone who's ever seen them. They remember me. And now, if you've read this far, they'll remember you too. Stay away from Death Valley. Stay away from the moving rocks. And if you ever feel cold air in the desert heat, run, and don't look back. My name is Vincent Ashford. I was a Death Valley Ranger for 14 years. And I'm telling you this because someone needs to know the truth. The pale ones are real, and they're still out there, waiting in the cold places, under the burning sand. Stay away from Death Valley, please. Just stay away. My name is Elizabeth Whitmore, but everyone calls me Liz. I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 9 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was November 1989, and I was working my usual shift at the Cades Cove station. The old valley sits like a bowl between the mountains, surrounded by peaks that seem to watch everything that happens below. The Cherokee used to call this place sacred, and after what happened, I understand why. I became a ranger after surviving a tornado back in '79, spent 3 hours trapped under debris, listening to the wind tear everything apart above me. When I finally got out, I knew I wanted to help people when disasters strike. The Park Service seemed like the perfect place to do that. I specialized in emergency communications and disaster response. I thought I was good at predicting when trouble was coming. That morning started normal enough. I was checking the radio equipment when my partner James Morrison came in, shaking his head. James handled search and rescue, a big guy with kind eyes who'd pulled more lost hikers out of these mountains than anyone else I knew. "We got another weird report," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Family from Ohio says they saw a giant bird with red eyes near the old mill. Dad swears it was 8 feet tall with wings like a bat." I shrugged. Probably just an owl. You know how shadows play tricks in these mountains. But something felt wrong. The air was too still, like the whole valley was holding its breath. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual. I'd learned to trust my instincts about disaster, and every instinct I had was screaming that something bad was coming. Dr. Patricia Vance arrived that afternoon. She was a researcher from the university, studying what she called unexplained phenomena in the park. Thin and serious, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, she had boxes of strange equipment in her car. "I've been tracking unusual reports from this area," she told me as we walked toward the visitor center. 23 separate sightings of an unidentified flying creature in the past 6 weeks. Each sighting was followed within 48 hours by a serious accident or natural disaster. I stopped walking. What kind of accidents? Car crashes, hiking accidents, flash floods. Small stuff, but people got hurt. And the timing is too perfect to be coincidence. That's when Thomas Nighthawk showed up. He was a Cherokee elder, maybe 70 years old, with silver hair braided down his back and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He'd been coming to the park for years, always showing up when something wasn't right. "The death bird is stirring," he said without any greeting. "My grandmother told me stories about the Tlanua, the great winged one. It comes before great changes, before the earth shakes and the sky falls." I wanted to laugh, but something in his voice made me stop. Thomas had never been wrong about the mountains, not once. That evening, I was closing up the station when all the lights went out. Not just in the building, the whole valley went dark. Through the windows, I could see the mountains outlined against the stars, but something was wrong with the sky. There was a shape moving between the peaks, something huge and dark with eyes that glowed red like hot coals. I grabbed my radio, but it was dead. All the equipment was dead. The backup generators kicked in, but even they seemed to struggle, their lights flickering like candles in the wind. The shape passed over the visitor center, and for just a moment, I saw it clearly. It wasn't a bird. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. Wings like leather stretched between bones, a body that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it, and those terrible red eyes that seemed to look right into my soul. Then it was gone, and the lights came back on. But I knew something had changed. The mountains felt different now, like they were watching us, waiting for something to happen. I went home that night and dreamed of disasters. Earthquakes that split the earth open, floods that swept away everything in their path. And through it all, those red eyes watching from the sky. When I woke up, I knew the real nightmare was just beginning. The next morning, I found James already at the station, looking like he hadn't slept. "Did you feel that earthquake last night?" he asked. "What earthquake?" "Around midnight. Just a small one, but it lasted longer than it should have. And look at this." He showed me a seismograph, reading the patterns all wrong. "It's like something big landed on the mountain and took off again." Dr. Vance arrived an hour later with more equipment. She'd been monitoring electromagnetic fields around the park, and her readings were going crazy. "Whatever that thing is, it's putting out more energy than a radio tower," she said, "and it's getting stronger." We drove out to where the family had reported their sighting. The old grist mill sat beside a creek, its water wheels still turning after all these years. But something was wrong with the place. The water in the creek was flowing backward, just for a few feet near the mill, like something was pulling it upstream. "That's not possible," James said. But we could all see it happening. Thomas was waiting for us there, standing perfectly still beside the water wheel. "It roosts here during the day," he said. "This is where it watches and waits." I looked up at the trees around the mill. The branches were bent in strange ways, twisted like they'd been grabbed by giant hands, and there, pressed into the soft earth beside the creek, was a footprint. Not a bird's foot. This had claws, but they were arranged wrong, like a hand, with too many fingers. "How big do you think it is?" I asked. Dr. Vance knelt beside the print with a measuring tape. "Based on this, I'd say at least 8 feet tall, maybe bigger when it spreads its wings." A cold wind blew through the valley, and I shivered. But it wasn't just the cold. Something was watching us. I could feel eyes on the back of my neck, patient and intelligent and very, very old. "We should go," I said. But as we walked back to the car, I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was a sound like wind through a cave, but it was coming from above. I looked up and saw it perched on the mill's roof, its red eyes fixed on us. For a moment, nobody moved. The creature was huge, bigger than any bird I'd ever seen. Its wings were folded against its body, but even folded they stretched 10 feet across, and those eyes, they seemed to look right through you, like they could see things that hadn't happened yet. Then James made a mistake. He reached for his camera, and the creature's head snapped toward him. The red eyes flared brighter, and suddenly James was screaming. "I can see it," he yelled. "I can see myself dying. Oh God, I can see how I'm going to die." The creature spread its wings and launched itself into the air. The sound it made as it flew away was like a scream and a warning all at once. James fell to his knees, shaking and crying. "What did you see?" I asked, helping him up. "I was underwater," he whispered. "I couldn't breathe. Something was holding me down. And those eyes, they were watching me drown." Dr. Vance was frantically taking readings with her equipment. The electromagnetic pulse when it looked at him was off the charts. It's like it transmitted information directly into his brain. Thomas just nodded. "The death bird shows what's coming, is trying to warn us." "Warn us about what?" I asked. "Something terrible is going to happen to this valley. Something that will kill many people unless we listen to what it's trying to tell us." That night, I stayed late at the station, monitoring the radio frequencies. Around midnight, I started picking up strange signals. Not words, but something like music. If music could be made of fear and sadness. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Then I saw lights moving through the valley. Not normal lights. These were red and pulsing, like a heartbeat made of fire. They danced between the trees, following the creek toward the mountains. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The air was thick and hard to breathe, like before. A thunderstorm. But there were no clouds in the sky, just stars that seemed dimmer than they should be. The lights were gone, but I could still hear that terrible music. And underneath it, like a whisper in my ear, I heard words. "The earth will shake, the water will rise, the mountain will fall. Listen, listen, and warn them." I ran back inside and tried to call the main office, but the phones were dead. The radio was working, but all I got was static. I was completely cut off from the outside world. That's when I realized the creature wasn't just predicting disasters, it was trying to prevent them. But something was stopping it from getting its message across. Something was keeping us from understanding what it was trying to tell us. I fell asleep at my desk and dreamed of red eyes and rising water. When I woke up, I knew James's vision was just the beginning. The accident started 3 days later. First, it was a family from Virginia whose car went off the road near Cades Cove. They said they swerved to avoid a giant bird that swooped down at their windshield. The father broke his arm, but they were lucky the car stopped just short of a 100-foot drop. Then a group of hikers got lost on the Appalachian Trail. They were experienced, had good equipment, but somehow they ended up walking in circles for 12 hours. When we finally found them, they were hypothermic and babbling about red eyes. In the trees, it was trying to tell us something. One of them kept saying, it wanted us to go back, to warn people, but we Dr. Vance was documenting everything. She'd set up monitoring equipment all around the valley, and the readings were getting stranger every day. The electromagnetic disturbances are creating dead zones, she told me. Communication equipment fails in a pattern that's spreading outward from the mill. James hadn't been the same since his vision. He kept staring at water, the creek, puddles, even his coffee cup. I can't get it out of my head, he said. The feeling of drowning, of something holding me down, and those eyes, watching me die. Thomas visited every day now. He'd brought sage and other herbs, burning them in small ceremonies around the valley. The deathbird is getting desperate, he said. It's trying harder to make us understand, but we're too afraid to listen. What exactly are we supposed to be listening for? I asked. The warning. The Cherokee have stories about the going back hundreds of years. It only appears before great disasters, earthquakes, floods, wars. It doesn't cause them. It sees them coming and tries to warn people. But why here? Why now? Thomas looked up at the mountains surrounding us. This valley has seen much death. Cherokee were forced from their homes here. Soldiers died in the Civil War. Miners were killed in accidents. All that pain and fear, it leaves a mark. And now something bigger is coming. That night, I was alone. At the station when the creature came back, I heard the sound of wings first, like wind through a cave. Then the red eyes appeared outside my window, just floating in the darkness. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. Instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The eyes weren't angry or evil. They were sad, ancient and tired, and desperately trying to communicate something important. I stood up and walked to the window. The creature was perched on the roof of the visitor center, its wings spread wide. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It wasn't a bird at all. It was something else, something that had been human once, maybe, but changed, by centuries of bearing witness to disaster. The red eyes fixed on mine, and suddenly I was somewhere else. I was standing on a mountain peak, looking down at the valley, but it wasn't the valley I knew. The creek was gone, replaced by a raging river. The mountains were cracked and broken, and the water was rising, covering everything. I saw the old mill swept away. I saw the visitor center underwater. I saw cars floating like toys and people running for higher ground. And through it all, I heard a sound like thunder that went on, like the earth itself was screaming. Then I was back in the station, gasping for breath. The creature was gone, but I could still hear its voice in my head. 3 days. The earth will shake. The water will rise. Warn them. I tried to call the main office, but the phones were still dead. I tried the radio, but got only static. I was completely cut off, and time was running out. The next morning, James found me passed out at my desk. "Liz, you look terrible. What happened?" I told him about the vision, about the rising water and the broken mountains. He listened with growing horror, especially when I mentioned the flooding. "That's how I die," he whispered. "In the flood, I can see it now, clear as day. The water comes so fast, and there's nowhere to run." Dr. Vance arrived with more bad news. The electromagnetic disturbances are getting worse. They're not just interfering with communications now, they're affecting the weather. I'm picking up seismic activity that doesn't match any known fault lines. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means something big is moving underground. Something that could trigger landslides, flash floods, maybe even small earthquakes." Thomas nodded grimly. "The Deathbird's visions are getting stronger because the disaster is getting closer. We have maybe 2 days before it happens. Before what happens? The dam breaks," he said simply. "There's an old dam upstream from here, built in the 1940s. If it fails during heavy rain, this whole valley will flood in minutes. That's what the Deathbird is trying to warn us about." I felt sick. How many people are in the valley right now? Hundreds, maybe thousands, if you count the campgrounds and hiking trails. We had to get everyone out. But how? The phones were dead, the radio was useless, and nobody in authority would believe us anyway. We were on our own. That night, the creature appeared to all of us at once. James, Dr. Vance, Thomas, and I were at the mill, trying to figure out how to warn people. When the red eyes appeared in the trees around us, this time we all saw the vision. The dam cracking, water pouring through like a liquid avalanche. The valley filling like a bathtub, faster than anyone could run. And above it all, the creature flying in desperate circles, trying to save people who couldn't understand its warning. When the vision ended, we were all crying, not from fear, but from the creature's pain. It had been trying to prevent disasters for centuries, watching helplessly as people died because they wouldn't listen to its warnings. "We have to evacuate the valley," I said. "Tomorrow, whether anyone believes us or not." But as we walked back to our cars, I realized we might already be too late. The ground under my feet felt different, like it was holding its breath, and in the distance I could hear the first rumbles of thunder. The storm was coming, and with it, the disaster the creature had been trying to warn us about all along. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I went over my supervisor's head and called the park director directly. I told him about the visions, the creature, the coming disaster. He listened for about 30 seconds before cutting me off. "Ranger Whitmore, you're obviously under a lot of stress. I'm ordering you to take some time off and see a counselor." "Sir, you don't understand. People are going to die if we don't evacuate the valley. There's no scientific basis for evacuation. I'm not going to panic thousands of visitors because of some bird sightings and bad dreams." The line went dead. I was on my own. James was waiting outside the station with Thomas and Dr. Vance. "Any luck?" he asked. "They think I'm crazy." I looked up at the sky. Dark clouds were building over the mountains, and the wind was picking up. "How long do we have? The storm hits tonight," Thomas said. "If the dam's going to fail, it'll happen then." Dr. Vance was pale and shaking. "My equipment is going insane. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts, and I keep hearing voices, the creature's voice, telling me to run." "We can't run," I said. "There are hundreds of people in this valley. We have to find a way to warn them." That's when the creature appeared in broad daylight, perched on the roof of the visitor center. It was huge, bigger than I'd realized before. Its wings blocked out the sun, and its red eyes were brighter than ever. But this time, it wasn't alone. Other shapes were moving through the trees, smaller versions of the creature, or maybe the same creature from different times. They were all trying to communicate the same message: danger, flee, the water rises. Visitors started screaming and running. Some grabbed their cameras, others just stared in shock. But finally, people were seeing what we'd been seeing. All along, the creature let out a sound like a tornado siren, a warning that could be heard for miles. The smaller shapes took flight, circling the valley and crying out their warnings. And in that moment, I understood something terrible. The creature wasn't just predicting this disaster. It was stuck in it. It had been trying to prevent the same catastrophe over and over, trapped in a loop of time and tragedy, watching the same people die because they wouldn't listen to its warnings. "It's not from our time," I said to the others. "It's from the future, or maybe from every time this has happened before. It's trying to change the past to prevent the disaster." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. In the distance, I could hear the sound of rushing water. The dam was already under stress. That's when federal agents arrived. Black SUVs with government plates, men in suits who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. They'd been monitoring Dr. Vance's research, and they weren't here to help. "Dr. Vance, you're coming with us," their leader said. "Your research into temporal anomalies is classified." "Temporal anomalies?" I asked. "The creature exists outside normal time," Dr. Vance explained quickly. "It can see future events because it's lived through them before. The government's been studying it for years, trying to use its abilities for intelligence gathering." The agents moved toward her, but the creature let out another shriek. This time, the sound was different, angry, protective. The smaller shapes dove at the agents, forcing them to take cover. "It's trying to protect us," James said in wonder. "It knows we're the only ones who can warn people." I made a decision that would haunt me forever. I grabbed the emergency broadcast radio from the station and started sending out a general alarm. "This is Ranger Whitmore at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. All visitors must evacuate Cades Cove immediately. Repeat, this is a general evacuation order. Seek higher ground immediately." The agents tried to stop me, but Thomas stepped in. "Their way. This is Cherokee land," he said quietly. "You have no authority here." The rain was coming down harder now, and I could hear the sound of running water everywhere. The creek beside the mill was already over its banks, and the water was rising fast. The creature spread its wings and took off toward the mountains, flying upstream toward the dam. The smaller shapes followed it, all crying out their warnings, and for the first time since this all began, I felt hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time, people would listen. The first explosion came from the mountains, a sound like thunder that went on and on. The dam was failing, just as the creature had warned. I could see a wall of water rushing down the valley, tearing out trees and carrying away everything in its path. Everyone to higher ground. I screamed into the radio. The dam has failed. The valley is flooding. Some people listened. I saw families running toward the mountains, carrying their children and whatever they could grab. Others just stood and stared, unable to believe what they were seeing. The creature appeared one last time, flying just ahead of the flood. Its red eyes were blazing like fire, and its voice was louder than the rushing water. This time, even the skeptics could hear its warning. Run, it seemed to say. Run now, or die. And finally, people ran. The flood lasted 3 hours. When it was over, half the valley was underwater, and the old mill was gone. But because of the warnings, because of the creature's desperate attempts to save us, most people had made it to higher ground. We lost 12 people that day. 12 souls who couldn't run fast enough or wouldn't listen to the warnings. But hundreds more were saved because a creature from outside time had refused to give up on us. James survived, though he'd come close to drowning just like in his vision. A tree branch had pinned him underwater for nearly a minute before Thomas pulled him free. I saw its eyes, he told me later. Even underwater, I could see those red eyes watching me, but they weren't watching me die. They were watching me live. Dr. Vance wasn't so lucky. The visions had broken something in her mind, and she spent the next year in a psychiatric hospital. She kept drawing pictures of the creature, trying to document what she'd seen. The government agents took all her research and classified it, but they couldn't take her memories. The official report blamed the flooding on a structural failure of the old dam, caused by heavy rains and poor maintenance. There was no mention of the creature, no acknowledgement of its warnings. The government wanted people to forget what they'd seen, but I couldn't forget. The experience had changed me, opened something in my mind that I couldn't close. I started having prophetic dreams, visions of future disasters, small ones at first, car accidents, hiking injuries, flash floods, but I could see them coming, and I could warn people. Thomas taught me Cherokee ceremonies for communicating with the spirit world. The Deathbird chose you, he said. You're the bridge between our world and theirs now. It's a heavy burden, but an important one. The creature never appeared at Cades Cove again. Its work there was done, its warning finally heard. But I knew it was still out there, somewhere, trying to prevent the next disaster. And I knew that someday I might see those red eyes again. I stayed with the Park Service for another 15 years, becoming an unofficial early warning system for the region. Rangers would call me when they felt something was wrong, when the mountains seemed to be holding their breath. I was right more often than I was wrong. I retired in 2004, but I still monitor the supernatural activity in the park system. There are others like me now, people who've been touched by things beyond our understanding. We keep in touch, share information, try to prevent disasters before they happen. The government still studies the creature, though they call it by code names now. They've learned to track its appearances, to predict where it might show up next. But they still don't understand what it really is, or why it cares so much about saving human lives. I think I know, though I think the creature was human once, maybe many humans who died in disasters that could have been prevented. They're trapped between life and death, doomed to witness tragedy over and over until they can find a way to change the outcome. Cherokee called it the Tlanua, the Deathbird, but I think a better name would be the Hope Bird, because even in the darkest moments, even when all seems lost, it never stops trying to save us. I still dream about those red eyes sometimes. Not nightmares, but gentle dreams where the creature and I talk without words. It tells me about the disasters it's prevented, the lives it's saved, the warnings it's given to people who were brave enough to listen. And sometimes, just sometimes, I dream of a future where the creature's work is done, where it can finally rest, knowing that humanity has learned to heed its warnings and prevent the disasters that once seemed inevitable. Until then, I'll keep watching the skies and listening to the wind, because somewhere out there, the Deathbird is still flying, still trying to save us from ourselves. And if you ever see red eyes in the darkness, don't run. Listen, because it might just be trying to save your life. The end.